Hey everyone, welcome to this live stream or video for those who are watching it after the live stream. So in the past, I've been authenticating from GitHub Actions to AWS using secrets. And these have been two important secrets, but there's something wrong with them. And I'll just paste them right here on line 28 to remind you of what they are. I'll paste. So the first one has been or was the AWS access key ID, and the other one is the AWS secret access key. But these are not good to use because they are long-lived tokens, and that makes it risky. If anybody gets them, then we are in trouble. So the best thing to do is to keep using GitHub Actions and AWS, but remove these tokens, okay? And I can see I had removed them. Okay, I'll go ahead and remove them, but instead use temporary credentials. Imagine every time we have a GitHub action, every time we have an action happening between these two AWS, we have a temporary authentication happening, meaning there is a temporary credential that is exchanged between GitHub Actions and AWS. And once the workflow has done, the jobs are finished running, that is the end. We don't get another token. And that token only lasts for that session. Don't you think that would be something really good? Think about it. A temporary, short-lived token is the solution to this. Now, how do we create this temporary token? Should be the question you have in your mind. The first way, not the first way, but the first step that we're going to implement is going to be to allow GitHub Actions to ask for a token, okay, from GitHub. And by the way, before I go far, all what we are doing is what is called, let me put a comment here, is called OIDC, which is simply Open Connect, OpenID Connect. And it is simply what I've been explaining, a way which allows GitHub Actions to authenticate with AWS without using long-lived secret keys. As simple as that. A way to authenticate with AWS without having to use secret keys. Actually, it is built on top of OAuth, OAuth 2. Okay, so think of it this way. If you are using OAuth and you want to maybe log in using Google, the login with Google does not require you to put your password. That's the good thing about it. Even logging with Facebook, with Apple, LinkedIn, GitHub, you don't need to put your password. So OpenID Connect is built on this technology called OAuth 2. Only that in this case, you also don't need to add your password. But again, it's not you going to do it. In OAuth 2, you have to do it synchronously. You have to participate in the authentication process. But in OpenID Connect, you don't do it. Okay? The authentication is done for you depending on the permissions you have set. Nice. Now, the first thing you need to do is to tell your GitHub Actions to be able to have permissions to request for a token, for an OIDC token or an OpenID Connect token. And this piece of configuration from line 21 to 23 is what enables GitHub Actions to request for this token from GitHub. So I'll write the steps in this file. So step 1, GitHub Actions requests token from GitHub. okay, to authenticate with to authenticate. I like this comment by AI. Authenticate with AWS. You get. Then step 2. Okay, if you go to line, what line is that? Line. I want to show you. I think even this one here has it. I want to show you. I seen this. I think we have it everywhere else in other parts. Okay, we have this part saying configure AWS credentials role to assume. Okay, now once AWS or GitHub has that token, okay, GitHub then sends that token to AWS. So I'll say GitHub, I'll expand it, GitHub action sends the token to AWS STS, okay, to assume a role. And I'm going to explain to you all this. I'm going to show you how to create this. So which role is that? The role is configured in your environment variables. So role to assume. And I will, let me see here. I'll show you here. Are you seeing this page? I have a secret called AWS role to assume. And I'll show you how to punch in that value in a moment. Now, what's the next step? So after GitHub sends the token to AWS STS. So STS is, I think it is secure the token, okay, and gives back temporary credentials to GitHub action. Okay. Then step 4, GitHub action uses the temporary credentials to perform the Terraform operations, like creating an S3 bucket, creating an EC2 instance, configuring the EC2 instance, and maybe RDS, whatever you want to do. Okay. So the first step is to have these permissions. Don't forget that. If you don't have this, you're going to fail. Then after that, ensure you specify the AWS role to assume. I'm going to show you how to do this, and specify the AWS region you want to work with. And the role session name simply says that during this time of exchange between GitHub Actions and AWS, the session name will be called GitHub Actions Terraform Deploy. As simple as that. You can name it better if you have a better name. All right, now we need to go to AWS so that I show you how to have this AWS role to assume. So when I go to AWS and I go here to services, the first thing you need to do is to create what is called an identity provider. So identity provider simply means you're creating a service, okay, which will be responsible for authenticating. As simple as that. So go to IAM dashboard on AWS, then click on identity providers. After that, click on add provider. You see, I actually have already a provider, and this was done about 9 days ago, and I was doing it for this project. So click on add provider, then click on open ID connect, then you give the provider URL and the audience. So where do you get these values from? It's actually free and available, given to you by GitHub. If I do GitHub open ID connect, okay, and maybe go to their docs, you will see the values given to us. Let me see. A better search would have been GitHub open ID connect AWS, which I think I've visited it before. Yeah, nice. No, this one I just clicked on right now. Should be this other one. All right, this is it. Okay, saying adding the identity provider to AWS. Says for the provider URL, use this. You get. So you can just copy this. Okay, come here, not here, but to your AWS and paste. Of course, I need to remove these other 2 forward slashes. Then after that, copy this and paste as the value for the audience. So what does this mean? It simply says allow GitHub, okay, as a service to be able to authenticate with AWS for only the STS. As simple as that. Allow GitHub Actions to authenticate as a service with us for only STS. So what is STM? STS, I mean, is security token service. I hope I'm right, but we can simply Google it to be sure so that I don't mislead any of you. Many of you can easily scream in the comments. So you see it says AWS security token service. Okay, security token service. After that, you can add tags if you want, but then I'll click on add provider. But you see it says a provider with this URL already exists. So I can leave that. Okay, and maybe use even what I already have. Okay, so if I go to this other provider that I created, you can see that the audience, okay, is already set up. Okay, and the provider is what I just showed you. Now when you're done with that, you need to create you need to assign now a role. Okay, so you can just simply click on this assign role button. You can say create a new role or use an existing role. You can create a new role. Okay, and then what you want is the web identity. Okay, after adding the web identity, you specify the identity provider. In this case, it's the same that we just created. So tokens.actions.githubusercontent.com. The audience, put the same audience. Then the GitHub organization. If you have an organization, specify it. If you don't have it, simply go to your GitHub page and copy your username. Okay, copy your username, go back and paste it. You can also specify the repository. For example, I can come here, copy the repository name, come here and paste. You can also specify the branch. Okay, it may be main. Okay, it's optional. You can specify it, you can not specify it. Okay, I'll leave it just to show you that you can be flexible. So I can now click next. So by finishing the first step, okay, if I go back to the first step, what we did here is by creating what is called a trusted entity. Okay, you're trying to say that who is allowed to assume a particular role. That is what I showed you here. Okay, I think this role to assume on line 75 is what we're trying to do here. Okay, who is allowed to assume this particular role? It is this guy here called GitHub. Okay, the GitHub Actions, and for the security token service only. Okay, we won't allow them. We want GitHub to be allowed to assume a role. That's what we are doing on this page. As simple as that. And then click next. Then, after defining who is allowed to assume a role, you need now to define what they can do. You get what can these people do after they have been given this role. That is where the permissions come in. Again, I'll repeat. A trusted entity simply says who is allowed to assume a role, and then the permission is what can they do after they've become that role. So here you can search for anything. You can say AWS EC2. We have EC2. I'm not seeing any. Let me say EC2. Okay, so you can pick the permission you want. Okay, so I'll maybe pick maybe this. Okay, randomly. Let's say I need S3. Okay, full access. I pick this one. In fact, even EC2 full access is here. I can pick it. Okay, for our project, what else do we need? We need you can check your Terraform config to see what we need. Okay. They pick S3, EC2. Maybe you need RDS. Okay, full. You add. Then you click next. Okay. Then you give this role a name. So I'll call it maybe GitHub second role. Okay, but I'm going to delete this. Then you can look at your config which you've been given. Okay, see the trust policy. You can now see how it has been configured for you automatically, and you can edit it. And by the way, if you go to the documentation I had showed you earlier, they explain everything here. Okay, and this one is one of the best ways you can learn anything on the internet. So if you want to even understand it better, read this page. It's actually a very short page. You can read this in 5 minutes. It will be basically what I've already been showing you. Okay, but you'll see everything they're telling you, adding the identity provider, configuring the trust policy I just showed you right now. Okay, what else? You'll see things like updating your actions. What am I even saying? They say actions. I guess I'm getting high this morning. I meant to say updating your GitHub Actions workflow. Okay, and that means you have to add these permissions. Okay, and then you have to also add the AWS role to assume. That is something I've been showing you in the past few minutes. So when you're done, you give it a good name. You can even add a description. Then you create the role. Okay, but of course I'm going to delete it. Okay, because I don't need this role. I already have one. So once you're done with your role, you click on it and then but copy this ARN. Okay, so you copy it. After you copy it, you go to your GitHub Actions. Okay, and create this secret. Okay, what is happening with me today? I think I need to work out before I continue my day. Create this secret called AWS role to assume, and then give it a value. Okay, give it that value of the ARN, and that will be the role to assume. Why? Because it is the ARN for the role we just created for our GitHub action. So what do you think is ARN? Let me just look at the chat in case there's any question. Okay, so ARN, I'm sure many of you already know this, but it's simply an abbreviation for AWS resource name. Simple as that, which is simply an identifier, a unique identifier for resources on GitHub. And in this case, it's becoming an identifier for our role. And with that, you'll be done. Okay, so if you've understood this, simply go to the GitHub repository in the link in the description and then copy it, study it, and you can set it up for this same project. That is if you've decided to own this project and make it your own and also learn, or you can apply it to any other project that you are building. But it's a very secure way of authenticating with GitHub. So I'll go ahead and delete this because I don't need it. So thank you for joining this live stream, and I'll see you in the next video or live stream. Bye for now.